The desert at sundown was a cruel place, a world painted in copper and bruised purple, where shadows stretched long and the cold crept in before the light had even surrendered. Clara Dawson felt every inch of that cold clawing through her threadbare dress. Each breath she took tasted of dust and exhaustion, as if the land itself was trying to swallow her voice, her strength, her memory of who she had once been. Just months earlier she had been a schoolteacher, proud of her little classroom with its crooked benches and sun-faded Bible. She remembered the laughter of the children, the chalk dust on her fingers, the warm aroma of cornbread that mothers brought after harvest. Those memories now felt like stories told by someone else, someone softer, someone safer. Out here, the world didn't care if you were kind or educated or hopeful. Out here, the world only cared if you survived the day. Clara's boots were nearly falling apart, the soles worn thin from miles of walking on rock and sand. Her hands shook uncontrollably, some of it from the cold, some from hunger, but most from the creeping sense that she had reached the end of what her body could give. Her satchel, once full of supplies she was sure would last, now sagged empty against her hip. She had been rationing her last crumbs for 2 days, and today she had eaten nothing at all. She forced herself forward only because stopping felt like surrender, but even determination had limits. When her knee buckled without warning, a sharp pain shot up her leg, and she collapsed hard onto the ground. The earth was unforgiving, jabbing into her ribs and elbow. She tried to push herself up, but her arms trembled and folded beneath her. A soft, pitiful sound escaped her lips, a sound she hardly recognized as her own. The desert wind answered with silence. She lay there, half curled, half sprawled, staring at the fading blaze of the horizon. The sun dipped low, bleeding into the mountains, as though even the light was retreating from this godforsaken place. Clara blinked slowly, fighting tears. She didn't want to die. She didn't want to give in. But she couldn't deny what her body kept screaming. You can't keep going. Her throat felt raw when she whispered, "Please. Someone." But the wind carried her words away. She knew better than to hope. No one traveled this stretch of land after dusk outlaws, settlers. And soldiers all knew it was dangerous territory. Apache territory. Clara wasn't afraid of the Apache. Not in the way townsfolk tried to scare her. She had heard the rumor stories told by men who had never met one, tales twisted by fear or pride. But deep down, she knew people everywhere could be cruel or kind, and cruelty wasn't owned by any one nation. Still, she couldn't count on their mercy if she was found. Her eyes drooped, heavy as stones, as the desert sky darkened. She curled her fingers weakly into the dirt. Maybe this was the end. Maybe she would simply fade into the ground, leaving no trace, no name, no story. A small, tired part of her wondered if that would be easier than fighting a world that never fought fair. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats. Slow, steady, approaching. Her eyes snapped open. Fear jolted through her, giving her just enough strength to lift her head. A silhouette emerged against the twilight, mounted on a dark horse. The rider didn't rush. He moved with calm, deliberate grace, like he knew exactly where he was going and like he wasn't surprised to find her there. When the rider stopped before her, she saw him clearly, an Apache man, tall, broad-shouldered, with long black hair tied with leather. His expression was unreadable but not cruel. He studied her not like a scavenger eyeing a meal, but like a man assessing a wounded fawn unsure whether it wanted saving. Clara's lips trembled as she forced out a whisper, barely louder than breath. "All I need is shelter." She expected him to turn away, or worse, to laugh. But he didn't. His dark eyes softened just slightly, a flicker of understanding passing through them. He dismounted with practiced ease, walked toward her, and knelt at her side. Shelter, he said quietly, is not given lightly. He paused. But you speak truth. Truth opens doors. With surprising gentleness, he lifted her into his arms and carried her to his horse. Clara felt warmth, human warmth, for the first time in weeks. And in that moment, she realized he had heard far more than her words. He had heard her will to survive, and chosen not to let it die. Clara didn't remember much of the ride, just the sensation of swaying against the Apache warrior's chest, the thud of the horse's hooves, and the overwhelming relief that came from no longer being alone. The desert breeze stung her cheeks, but she didn't mind. After days of stumbling under the sun with no direction, even the rhythmic movement of the horse felt like a lullaby. She drifted in and out of consciousness until the horse slowed. A warm glow flickered, a head campfire light dancing between narrow canyon walls. The Apache camp was tucked in a natural cradle of stone, nearly invisible from the open land. Only a trained eye would have found it. Clara realized then that this was not a place outsiders were meant to see. As the warrior guided his horse into the camp, several figures rose from their seats around the fire, alert but not alarmed. Their gazes flicked from him to her, a strange, exhausted white woman slumped in front of him. Their expressions were guarded, but Clara sensed no immediate hostility. The warrior dismounted, then lifted her gently from the saddle. She braced for roughness, for suspicion, perhaps even anger. But instead, he addressed the group in a calm tone, firm but respectful. She didn't understand his words, but she recognized the cadence of someone offering explanation, not excuse. The oldest woman in the group stepped forward, a matriarch. Judging from the way others deferred to her, her silver-streaked hair was braided down her back, and her face held the weather-worn wisdom of someone who had seen more seasons than she cared to count. She studied Clara with a steady gaze that seemed to strip away fear and falsehood alike. Clara wanted to shrink back, to apologize for existing, but the woman simply nodded once. Permission granted, the warrior gently guided Clara toward the fire and settled her on a woven blanket. A younger woman, perhaps 18, offered her a gourd of warm water. Clara's hands trembled so badly she could barely hold it. The young woman steadied it for her, her touch careful, her eyes kind. "Thank you," Clara whispered, unsure if they understood English. But gratitude, she realized, needed no translation. Her throat burned with the first swallow. The warmth spread through her body, loosening the tight fear that had wrapped around her chest for days. She felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them away quickly. Breaking down now felt like a luxury she hadn't earned. When the warrior finally sat beside her, she noticed he had been watching the entire time, not possessively, not warily, but protectively, as though her safety was his responsibility. She didn't even know his name yet, but she trusted him more than she trusted half the men she had known in her life. The camp moved with quiet purpose. No one rushed. No one barked orders. Every action seemed part of a rhythm: collect water, tend to the fire, feed the horses, prepare the blankets. Clara felt clumsy just watching them. She had been raised to believe that civilization looked like towns, church bells, and main street stores. But this gentle coordination, this shared labor felt more civilized than anything she had seen in months. The young woman returned with a wooden bowl of stew, rich, warm, fragrant, with herbs Clara had never smelled before. Clara hesitated, unsure if she was worthy of it. But the girl placed it in her hands with a small nod. Eat. Clara took a bite. Then another, and another. The warmth of the stew brought life back into her limbs, strength into her fingers. Her stomach clenched painfully at first, but the food settled like a blessing. A tear slid down her cheek before she could stop it. She didn't belong here. She had nothing to offer. She was a burden, a mouth to feed, a stranger who had stumbled into their lives with nothing but a whispered plea. but no one here looked at her that way. When the fire crackled louder, the warrior finally spoke in English, his voice low and steady. "My name is Talon." Clara nodded weakly. "Clara Dawson." "Clara," he repeated, forming the unfamiliar shape with ease. She offered him the bowl, embarrassed she had eaten so quickly. He shook his head. "It is yours. You need strength." Strength. She hadn't felt that word in her bones for a long time. Around her, the camp continued its quiet rhythm. No one asked why she was alone. No one demanded she explain her past. They gave her what she had asked for, shelter, and expected nothing in return. For the first time since her schoolhouse burned, Clara felt something fragile and precious returning to her. Humanity, safety, a sense that she was more than her losses. And as she lay wrapped in a soft doeskin blanket that night, listening to the murmured voices of the Apache and the steady crackle of the fire, Clara realized she had stumbled into more than a camp. She had stumbled into a place where dignity was restored, where life, no matter how broken, was welcome to begin again. The next morning, Clara woke to the smell of fresh sage and sun-warmed earth. The camp was already stirring. Children stretching, women tending to fires, men checking the horses. She rose slowly, her body sore from the ride and the weight of exhaustion, and realized that her first full night of rest in weeks had been uninterrupted. The blanket Talon had offered, woven with care and embroidered with simple patterns, had shielded her not just from the desert chill but from her own fear. Talon was nearby, inspecting the horizon as the sun rose. His figure was tall and steady, every movement deliberate. There was something about the way he carried himself, a quiet command that did not rely on harsh words, that both unnerved and reassured her. He did not speak often, but when he did, his words were precise and weighed with thought, each one carrying meaning beyond the surface. Clara approached him cautiously, still unsure how much she was allowed to intrude on this man's space. She had been wandering, lost in the desert, and now she was in his world, a world she did not understand, a world that operated on rules she had yet to learn. She carried with her the ingrained habits of a settled life, measuring time by bells and sundials, thinking survival was about possession and protection, but she was learning quickly that here, survival meant awareness, patience, and respect. "You learn fast," Talon said without turning, his eyes scanning the desert beyond the canyon. "Not just what the land shows you, but what it does not." Clara frowned slightly, unsure what he meant. He gestured to a trail of animal tracks near the camp. "See them?" he asked. "See where the deer have been, where the coyotes have followed. Watch carefully. Listen. Not all dangers are obvious." She nodded, trying to memorize the lesson. Over the next hours, Talon guided her through small tasks, tracking footprints, checking the water supply, and even noticing subtle signs of approaching weather. Each time he corrected her, he did so with patience, never frustration. He allowed her to make mistakes, then showed her the right way, emphasizing understanding over obedience. Clara realized she was learning far more here than she ever had in a classroom back east. Survival in the West was not just about skill, it was about attention, humility, and respect for the forces around you. That evening, as the sun dipped below the jagged horizon, she found herself repairing a worn shirt by the fire, her fingers stiff but growing steadier. Talon approached silently and sat beside her. She was tempted to look away, embarrassed by her slow progress, but he didn't judge. Instead, he watched quietly, the firelight reflecting in his eyes, giving him an almost otherworldly presence. It was as if he were not only seeing her actions but reading her thoughts, understanding the fears and hopes she tried to hide. "You asked for shelter," he said softly. "Most people ask for protection or food. You asked for the one thing that is hardest to give and to receive." Shelter is more than a roof. It is responsibility, strength, and trust. Clara paused, the needle in her hand hovering over the fabric. I wasn't looking for charity," she said quietly. "I just needed a chance to stand again." Talon nodded, a subtle acknowledgement of the courage behind her words. "That is why you are here. Not because you asked, but because you showed you could accept more than just a handout. You showed willingness." For the first time, Clara understood that Talon's perception of her had nothing to do with her past failures, her empty pockets, or her vulnerability. He saw her resilience, the same resilience she had tried so hard to deny in herself. She realized that this silence, these moments of shared labor and observation, were not empty. They were teaching her more than survival skills. They were teaching her about worth, trust, and the strength found in quiet perseverance. Over the following days, she and Talon spoke more, slowly, carefully. She shared stories of the small schoolhouse she once ran, the lessons she taught, and the children she loved. He listened, his responses sparse but thoughtful, each word like a stone laid carefully into a foundation. He, in turn, taught her about his world, the land, the patterns of the seasons, and the way the Apache moved in harmony with the desert. She began to see that their worlds, though different, could intersect with respect and understanding. And in the quiet evenings, as the camp settled under the stars, Clara realized that Talon's presence offered more than guidance. It offered a steadying force, an unspoken promise that she was safe, valued, and capable. For the first time in weeks, she felt the fragile stirrings of hope. She had asked for shelter, and she had received it. But she had also received something far greater, a chance to remember who she was and who she could become. The days in the Apache camp had settled into a rhythm. Clara rose with the sun, helped tend the fire, and worked alongside the other women, gradually mastering the tasks that once seemed foreign and impossible. Children laughed as she taught them letters and numbers, her voice carrying over the crackle of the fire, her hands moving confidently through lessons and chores alike. For a brief moment, she believed she could leave the past behind entirely until the West reminded her that it never forgot. It happened on a morning like any other. Clara was sweeping the dust from the communal path when a distant, unmistakable clatter reached her ears, the sound of hooves pounding hard earth. She paused, heart stuttering, as a familiar cold dread crept up her spine. From the hilltop, a group of men emerged, their silhouettes jagged against the brightening sky. They were rough, armed, and unmistakably outlaws. Her stomach tightened. She knew them immediately, the same men who had destroyed her settlement, who had set fire to her schoolhouse and sent her running through the desert. Clara froze. She had thought she had outrun them, that her weeks among the Apache had erased the trail she left behind. But the West had a long memory, and so did the men who preyed upon the weak. The air grew heavy with tension, and she felt the weight of her vulnerability settle upon her chest. Talon noticed her change immediately. He was standing nearby, inspecting the horizon as he often did, but the moment he saw the men, his stance shifted. A low, controlled anger replaced the calm that usually marked him. His hand rested on the hilt of his knife, but his eyes, dark, piercing, did not waver. "They've come for you," he said softly, almost to himself. Clara swallowed hard, unable to speak. The reality she had fled from was back, and this time she had nowhere to hide outside the camp. She expected fear from Talon, but instead, she saw resolve, a silent declaration that he would not let harm touch her while she was here. The camp stirred. Children were ushered behind the rocks, and the men and women of the Apache prepared quietly, a practiced readiness born of years surviving in a harsh land. Weapons were readied, but there was no panic, only focus. Every movement spoke of unity, and Clara realized she had never witnessed anything like it. This was not just defense. It was a statement of belonging. The outlaws approached, confident and cruel, expecting an easy target. They knew a lone white woman could be bargained for or threatened with little consequence. But they had not counted on the community she had entered. They had not counted on Talon. He stepped forward to meet them at the camp's edge, tall and unwavering. His voice, calm but commanding, carried across the space between them. "Our land. Our guest. You will go no further." The outlaws laughed, a harsh, grating sound meant to mock, but it faltered when Talon did not flinch, when the camp stood united behind him. The men's bravado faltered as they realized they were outnumbered and outmatched, not only in numbers but in spirit. The Apache did not fight recklessly. They fought with precision, with honor, and with an understanding of the land that gave them a profound advantage. The confrontation ended not with bloodshed, but with retreat. The outlaws, sensing their efforts would be met with a far greater force than anticipated, mounted their horses and disappeared down the trail from which they had come. Clara watched, a mixture of relief and awe flooding her chest. Talon returned to her side, eyes meeting hers. "They have gone," he said simply. Clara's knees weakened. She realized then that she had been more afraid of being helpless than of death itself. But here, with Talon, she was neither alone nor defenseless. She understood that protection was not just a shield. It was recognition, a declaration that she mattered and that she belonged. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of pride. Not in surviving the desert, not in fleeing from danger, but in the knowledge that she could stand here among these people and face what came with courage. Talon's quiet strength, his unspoken vigilance, had given her something she had almost forgotten, the assurance that she was capable of surviving, of standing tall, of being valued. And Clara knew, in the deepest part of herself, that the West could throw anything at her now, and she would face it with her head held high, guided by the lessons of patience, resilience, and respect she had learned among the Apache. The days in the camp after the outlaws' retreat carried a calmness that was almost sacred. The danger had passed, and yet the air felt charged with a new sense of life, one that Clara hadn't felt since before the fire destroyed her schoolhouse. She rose each morning with a renewed purpose, no longer simply surviving, but contributing. She realized that the lessons Talon had taught her about attention, patience, and the unspoken strength of community had prepared her not just for protection, but for participation. Clara began teaching the children. At first, it was simple: letters and numbers, reading and writing. The children were quick to learn, their bright eyes reflecting curiosity and hunger for knowledge. They had stories of their own, passed down through generations, full of lessons about the land, the animals, and their ancestors. Clara listened as intently as she taught, understanding that this exchange was not one-sided. She brought structure and literacy. They brought history, language, and an unfiltered sense of wonder at the world around them. She discovered, to her surprise, that teaching in the open air under the sun, beside the fire, with the desert cliffs rising around them, was unlike teaching in any classroom she had known. The lessons were alive. A count of seeds became a lesson in resource management. Reading a story about the river led to discussions about survival and observation. Mathematics was tied to the rhythm of planting and gathering. In this way, the camp became a living classroom, where every task, every story, every gesture was a lesson in both knowledge and wisdom. The Apache adults watched her closely, their initial curiosity giving way to quiet respect. They did not interfere, but they offered guidance when needed. One evening, Talon came to stand beside her as she read to a circle of children. The firelight danced across his face, highlighting the calm strength that had first drawn Clara's attention. She realized then that Talon's lessons were not just about survival. They were about understanding life in its totality, the balance of care, courage, and responsibility. "You have found a place," he said softly, not interrupting her lesson. "And they have accepted you." Clara glanced at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I didn't just find a place," she replied quietly. "I found a purpose." Talon nodded. He had always been a quiet presence, but now she understood the weight behind his watchfulness. Protection was more than standing guard. It was about creating a space where life could thrive, and Clara had stepped into that role willingly. Over the following weeks, Clara's confidence grew. She repaired clothing and tools, tended to the fire, and helped prepare meals. Her presence was no longer that of a stranger or burdened survivor. She was an active part of the camp's daily life. She felt pride in the small victories, teaching a child to read a new word, fixing a broken tool, understanding the subtle changes in the wind that signaled coming weather. And yet, her connection with Talon deepened in ways she had not anticipated. They shared quiet moments at sunset, discussing the rhythms of the desert, the lessons the land imparted, and the resilience of those who had lived and thrived there for generations. Clara taught him her language, sharing idioms and expressions that amused him with their complexity and humor. In turn, he shared stories of his ancestors, tales of courage and endurance that left her humbled and inspired. Each exchange was a bridge between their worlds, built with patience and mutual respect. One afternoon, as she watched the children play near the fire, Talon approached and handed her a small bundle of dried herbs. "For your teaching," he said simply, "to remind you that knowledge, like the land, must be nurtured." Clara accepted it with a grateful nod, understanding that this gesture was more than a gift. It was a recognition of her contribution and her belonging. She realized that shelter had been only the first step. What she had truly needed was purpose, and the Apache community had given her that dot by the fire that evening. Clara felt a quiet satisfaction she had not known in years. The desert no longer seemed harsh and empty. Instead, it was alive with opportunity, resilience, and shared life. She had discovered that giving knowledge and care to others not only helped them, but also healed her own wounds. Rebuilding her sense of worth and connection, Clara had arrived at the camp seeking only shelter, a place to survive. But she stayed because she had found something far more valuable, a community that valued her, a purpose that fulfilled her, and a life in which she could make a meaningful difference. In that realization, she understood one of the West's most essential lessons. Strength is measured not in solitude or survival alone, but in the courage to contribute, to teach, and to become part of something greater than oneself. The days had grown warmer, the desert sun casting golden light across the canyon walls, and the camp hummed with life. Clara moved among the people with confidence, teaching, tending, laughing, and learning in return. Every task she performed, every lesson she shared, strengthened her sense of purpose, and she realized that she had long since ceased to be the fragile, desperate woman who had whispered for shelter months ago. She had grown into someone capable, resilient, and valued. Yet, amid this flourishing life, one constant remained Talon. He was never intrusive, but his presence was steady, grounding. He taught her not only about survival, but about understanding how to read the land, the weather, and the hearts of those around her. He offered guidance without dominance, listening with patience and speaking with the weight of experience. For Clara, he became both mentor and companion, a living example of quiet strength and thoughtful protection. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised oranges and deep purples, Clara found herself sitting beside the fire, a circle of children at her feet, reading aloud from a worn storybook. Talon joined her silently, settling into a spot where he could watch her, and by extension, watch the community she had become a part of. The children didn't notice him, they were absorbed in the story, laughing, questioning, and learning, but Clara felt the reassuring weight of his gaze. "You have changed this place," Talon said softly, almost to himself. His words carried the weight of truth, not flattery. Clara looked up, surprised. I just taught the children what I know," she replied, a blush coloring her cheeks. "You have taught more than letters and numbers," Talon said. "You have taught patience, understanding, and courage. You have made this land, our people, a little stronger." For the first time, Clara understood fully what her journey had been about. Shelter had given her safety, but purpose had given her life. She had arrived as someone needing protection, and she had stayed as someone offering guidance, hope, and knowledge. Her contribution was recognized not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it through dedication and respect. As the fire crackled, Talon reached into a small pouch and drew out a delicately beaded necklace. The colors reflected the firelight, dancing like tiny flames across the beads. He held it out to her with quiet reverence. "It is a sign," he said simply. "A symbol of partnership, of belonging, and of trust. You are part of this land now, part of this people. And I am part of your life as well." Clara's hands trembled as she took it. For a long moment, silence passed between them, filled only by the whispers of the wind through the canyon and the distant laughter of the children. She realized that her heart, long frozen by fear and loss, was finally opening. Shelter, purpose, and belonging had brought her here, but now love, respect, and shared life were taking root. "I never imagined I could belong anywhere again," Clara whispered. "But here, with you, I feel whole." Talon nodded, his expression softening. "Strength is not only in survival, Clara. It is in connection, in care, in trust." The two sat together as night fully settled over the camp. The stars above the canyon sparkled like scattered gems, the wind carrying the songs of the desert and the soft murmur of life thriving in harmony. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Clara felt at peace. She was not simply a survivor of the harsh West. She was a part of it, accepted, respected, and loved. In the weeks that followed, the camp continued its rhythm, now with Clara fully integrated. The children grew under her guidance, learning both practical skills and the strength of character Talon had quietly instilled. Talon and Clara shared tasks, lessons, and quiet moments of companionship, teaching and learning from each other in equal measure. Their bond, forged in adversity and nurtured in shared purpose, became a quiet testament to the power of understanding and respect across cultures. Clara had once whispered for shelter, expecting nothing but a roof and a reprieve from hardship. What she had found instead was a home, a community, a purpose, and love, the rarest and most enduring gifts the West could offer. And so, beneath the vast desert sky, amid the cliffs and the firelight, Clara and Talon stood together, not as protector and protected, not as teacher and pupil, but as equals, partners, and friends who had discovered that strength, belonging, and respect were the true foundations of life. Educational message. Survival is important, but the true measure of life is found in connection, contribution, and respect. Strength comes not only from endurance, but from the courage to give, to teach, and to trust. Clara's journey from desperation to purpose, from fear to belonging, is a reminder that even in the harshest environments, the human spirit can thrive when met with kindness.